Okay, thank you. So next slide, please. Let's hope it works. It was working earlier. Perils of Zoom. Okay, please bear with us. There we go. Right. Thank you. Okay. Right. So let's then move forward. So tonight we're aiming to do 4 things. One is to give you an overview of the feedback that we received during the winter on the dog exercise rules, principally. Discuss any other issues that you raised with us. Provide information on next steps and the timing of the project, and also to answer as many questions as we can get through that have come in from yourselves and others. Next slide, please. Right, okay, great. So there's lots of information already on our website about the dog control policy review. The web link is there on the screen. This includes a summary of key issues, recordings from our previous webinar, which seems way back now in June. The current 2015 dog control policy, which is the one we're reviewing, that's available on the website as well, as is the dog control bylaw, and a series of questions and answers. So just a reminder, if you've got any more questions tonight, then just pop them in the chat box and we'll try and answer them later on. I've got people here that are going to help me to do that. So speaking of the team, next slide. There we go. We've got 3 experts on hand tonight to answer questions. As the strategic projects driver, I can answer questions relating to the policy review process itself. Carl Tutty is here to answer questions relating to animal control, particularly dogs. And Brad Ward can answer questions about our parks and reserves and fields and facilities. And behind the scenes, we've also got Chloe and Kate collating questions and moving slides on and so on, making sure this runs as smoothly as possible. We've allowed about an hour for this webinar, but we can be flexible. If it's shorter, then it's shorter. If it's longer, then we'll get through it as quickly as we possibly can. So let's get to the feedback itself. We've received over 300 items of feedback. Thank you everyone who has shared your thoughts, whether they're supportive of what we're trying to do or give ideas, or maybe weren't quite so supportive. It's all very welcome. We've had suggestions, ideas, thoughts on dog exercise areas. We've had requests and comments and information. It's all gone into a melting pot that the team are having to work through. Most relate to dog exercise areas, but there are other parts of the dog control policy that people have commented on. Also some really good comments about service provision that not actually part of the policy, but they're still extremely useful, and also suggestions for improvements from the customer perspective. So let's drill down into a bit more of the detail. The next slide, please. So Lake Tekuutu. This is the venue where we have had the biggest response. And almost everyone has wanted to keep dogs there one way or another. In fact, as you can see, only 3 people have said that dogs should be prohibited. Now, let's be clear, Council is not proposing to prohibit dogs from around Lake Tekuutu. Now, the Lake Tekuutu concept plan, which was consulted on with the community last year, has recommended that dogs should be allowed on leash only. And these numbers that you can see on the screen don't seem to show a huge groundswell of opinion in favor of keeping them off leash instead. You can see there's no clear desire whether to have dogs on leash or off leash. And this highlights Council's dilemma as to which way we should go. We can see from these numbers that we're going to upset as many people as we please, whichever way we decide to go. So if we decide to allow on leash, we upset half as many people. We upset as many people. If we go off leash, we upset the other lot of people. So in one sense, we can win, and we're not going to win either. Remember, these are not votes. They only provide us with a guide to community feelings. Have the next slide, please. Okay, now KAKEPUKU MAUNGA is another key site where Council has been asked to prohibit dogs. Now, the community feeling seems to lead towards allowing dogs. However, there are other considerations here, especially the request from local hapu to prohibit dogs, which would be in line with the Department of Conservation's policy on the Maunga. They manage about half of it. And also because I'm told there are many burials there. So it is sort of akin to allowing dogs to exercise in a cemetery. Now, not everyone is in agreement. Dogs should be on leash now, but many are not. But this does not legitimize changing the rules to off-leash exercise. However, due to the steepness of the track, keeping the dogs on leash can be impracticable or dangerous, I'm told. So there's lots of things that need to be weighed up here. Again, our difficulty is deciding how to satisfy as many people as possible, while recognizing that, again, not everyone's going to be happy. So we do need to consider the cultural and practical aspects of exercising dogs on the Maunga, and if there are any alternatives. Okay, next slide. Again, at KIHIKIHI domain, there's no obvious community pressure to prohibit dogs completely. However, there is a desire to keep them off playing fields. I'm sure the rugby players will really appreciate that. Interesting that here there is no groundswell wish to see the domain continue as an off-leash exercise area. This is possibly people being mindful of keeping dogs off the playing fields. There may be options for different rules at different times or parts of the domain. So it's something for the team to examine the feasibility of all the options there. And the next slide, please. As with Lake Tekuutu, the Tiawamutu Memorial Park concept plan was publicly consulted in 2021. It too recommends that dogs should be allowed on leash only. Again, there's nothing here to suggest particularly strong feeling in the community against that idea. Next slide. Next slide, please. Are we able to do it? Yes, we are. Good. Okay, those aren't the only locations. We've had several others, and here are a few of those others. Those other 4 sites we had most of the comments about. These had one one or two, certainly not enough to give us any particular direction as to what we could do. But the feedback does make us stop and consider what exercise arrangements might be best in these locations. Now, the Cambridge Town Belt, we had comments around it being used better for dog exercise, the potential for conflict with other users, and it's not necessarily secure for off-leash dogs. Now, Victoria Square in Cambridge is a site where dogs are currently prohibited, but there have been requests to allow some on-leash access. So that's something the team can look into. Waipuki Park was suggested as a place where there could be off-leash exercise. Naroto, there were requests for the lake walkway to be dogs on leash only and for dogs to be kept out of the lake. Now, as with KAKEPUKU MAUNGA, my understanding is that the lake itself is also a final resting place. So again, something for the team to consider. Brian Mayo Reserve, we've had requests for various improvements, including gates and water for the dogs, and more maintenance at the Wordsworth Street dog exercise area. The next slide, please. So we've had several other ideas and suggestions given to us. Some people pointed out the need for exercise places in urban areas. That's exercise for people, not just dogs, especially for older people or less mobile people, people who don't have easy transport to other parks. And I suppose looking ahead, we also need to think about reducing carbon emissions as well. That's going to be something to think about in the future, I'm sure. Some people have asked for exercise areas, dog exercise areas, that is, at places where the dogs could swim. Obviously, these would have to be safe swimming sites. Fields and paddocks, we know, are okay at times, but many dogs like bushwalks and trails, long linear walks rather than paddocks. Now, we've got very few options at the moment. So what can council do about creating more? That might be more of a long-term project, but again, that's something that the team can be thinking about. And this is particularly important depending on what is decided about KAKEPUKU. In relation to the proposal or the suggestion to ban dogs on sports fields, someone asked about pet pooches that go and support on the touch lines at Saturday sports matches. Also concerns about shared paths with cyclists. Now, that's probably a two-way concern. Cyclists probably have concerns about encountering dogs on leads as well. And there was also a suggestion that all non-breeding dogs should be neutered. I can see council struggling to enforce that one, but hey team, that's something you can consider. Next slide. Now, much as you might like it, council can't really afford to have animal control officers everywhere and at all times. Every new officer increases the annual dog rego fee by about $15. The alternative might be to raise the rates instead, except we don't pay for this service from the rates. It's the animal control service is paid for by the people that have the animals. Either way, animal control officers need to be paid for and equipped. The question of on the spot fines came up once or twice. They can be issued, but it's not as easy as it sounds. An offence either needs to be witnessed by the animal control officer or requires very clear evidence of who, what, and when. So the proper legal standards of evidence are necessary. Some suggestions around variable exercise times will probably exercise the minds of our team. This includes things like a site being on leash at some times of the day and off leash at other times of the day or different seasons. It's an idea we can consider. Some councils have tried it, so it's certainly worth a closer look. But it might not work for every site in Waipa, or indeed we might find it doesn't work at any site in Waipa, but until we have a look, we're not going to be sure. And a number of you have told us about signs that are missing, broken, faded, or whatever. So thanks for pointing those out to us. Next slide. And thanks also for all the suggestions for new and missing dog bin locations, for telling us about gates that are missing or where they need to be added, and the same too with fencing, and where we have agility equipment that needs some care and attention. So now that we have had these on the ground reports, our team can look into what can be fixed where and when and how much it'll all cost. Now, please remember council is subject to cost of living increases as well as budget constraints and supply chain delays and things like that. So some things we may not be able to get to for a while. Now, just a heads up that we will be engaging with the community in February and March next year as part of developing our next long-term plan. And that'll have formal consultation in 2024, but as part of that community engagement next February and March, please feel free to come along and have your say on these issues as well. Next slide. So where next on this policy review project? Well, there's still plenty of wag left in the tail of this project. Carl and Brad and their teams are looking through all the feedback, considering the options, and will be developing a series of proposals and options. These will be discussed with the new council at the end of November, and then firmer proposals can be worked up. It doesn't look as though the policy itself is going to need very much change. It's the rules around the exercise at the various locations. That's going to be the big issue, I think. And then once we've got the proposals for the policy and the exercise areas, we need to amend the dog control bylaw because that's used to enforce the policy, and the two need to be consistent. So we're hoping to have formal public engagement on all of this with formal submissions around April and into May next year. If the team find that the development of proposals is taking a lot longer than expected, that might be pushed back further into the middle of next year. We'll just have to see how it goes because we want to get this right rather than have it rushed. So the next slide, please, Kate. So we had a question received in advance. Do we have it there? There we go. So this is around Lola Silcock Park, goes along the river in Cambridge. One access to it is behind the council office. Something we probably need to have a look at. Can council insert signs at each entry point to the park saying that dogs must be kept on a leash? So I'm going to throw that. Well, who's going to take that, Carl or Brad? It's potentially either of you.
Probably Carl. The easy answer is yes, that's relatively straightforward. It's an existing dog on leash area, so we can probably respond to that fairly quickly. And we'll just have to bear in mind how that's affected by the changes of the policy, but in the short term, yes, that's an easy fix.
Okay, so we could actually confirm whether it's staying as an on-leash area within the proposals going to council, or whether it's likely to stay and work according to that.
Yes, we could put those signs up in the meantime.
Yeah, okay. Great. Okay, so any other questions that have come in to the Zoom chat box? So the first question I can see here is, can we see what Manawhenua have said? You can't actually see what they've said, but I can tell you what has been said to me in conversation to try to improve my understanding of their concerns around KAKEPUKU. I'm assuming it's relating to that, and that is that there are burials on KAKEPUKU. A number of people's ancestors are there, I understand. It strikes me as being akin to letting dogs loose in cemeteries, and obviously that's of concern to the local hapu. I'm told it was related to Lake Tekuutu. Comments just come in. Thanks, Wayne. I'm not so sure what the concerns are on Lake Tekuutu, but what we can do is try and find that out and put that onto our webpage as part of the questions and answers. But as I say, I think these questions were considered during the Lake Tekuutu concept plan development in 2020 and 2021. Brad, are you more familiar with that work?
Sorry, yeah, no, we've been through the process of Lake Tekuutu. So that covered the whole gambit of topics on the park use, not just solely on dog use. That was included.
So Manawhenua were comfortable with the recommendation for dogs on a leash. Have all their concerns been taken into account on
sorry,
that?
yes. So Manawhenua were part of developing that concept plan with us. Yeah, so they've been involved all along there.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. What about officers doing split shifts so they cover more time in the day? Okay, that sounds like a Carl question, mainly in regards to sports fields in the weekends and evenings. Thank you.
Yep, so definitely, I think the first thing to be clear there is that we do have officers working all of the time, but after hours, it's more in regards to the urgent complaints and stuff that comes in rather than active patrols. So, yep, certainly changing the way staff are working is definitely an option. And we do target problem areas after hours when we have trends of things we want to have a look at. So definitely an option, and is being considered as part of this.
And I suspect the feeling is around people, officers just checking what's going on sports fields on Saturday mornings, whether dogs are there.
Yep, absolutely. We have to be out there at the times the problem's happening.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, we seem to be having quite a few coming into the chat box. Retail Mutu's War Memorial Park. Apart from lack of enforcement, the other issue is defining the boundaries of the park itself, as many staff seem confused. So yeah, that's an ongoing issue. That's something a bit between you, Brad, and, well, I suppose it's probably you, Brad, isn't it? The boundaries of the park, and I suppose as part of this review, what the exercise arrangements are for each part of the park, if indeed it might vary to different parts of the park.
Yes, at the moment, the area is on the northern side of the Mangahoi stream, under where all the large oak trees are. The rest of the park is on lead. But in terms of differentiating where the different zones are, when we do new signage at the park, we'll be able to put some wayfinding signage up, which clearly articulates where the dog exercise areas are, or off-lead areas are. So that's still some time away in the plan.
Okay, so it's a matter of being clear for the dog walkers and the animal control officers as well, to be absolutely clear. Okay, do we have a time frame on when any changes will be implemented? Okay, so there's formal consultation, hoping April and May next year. Then we're probably looking at getting this all adopted. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking that's likely to be around August on that time frame, because obviously we've got to deal with all the submissions and councillors have got to consider them as well before the policy and the bylaw are adopted. So we're looking probably the best part of 10 months before this actually comes in. Anything that anyone wishes to add to that in terms of the practicalities of implementation on the ground? Brad or Carl?
Sorry, what was that last word, Carl? Sorry, Graham, I was reading the next question.
All right, okay, well, you can answer the next question in a minute, then I'll throw it across to you. But in terms of the practicalities of implementation, once we've got the bylaw and the policy through council, probably around August, is there any sort of time frames for actual implementation, or will it just happen on, say, just to pluck a date out of the air, don't hold me to it, 1st of September next year?
So yeah, we'll do all the priorities as budget can fit into it. So we've got the long-term plan coming up as well in terms of any new areas that might be included. Cal might have a bit more of a definitive idea of time around some of the legislative stuff, but in terms of some of the equipment or different areas that we might come up with through this process, that will be budget dependent.
The enforcement side, in my experience, council will usually make a decision at the time when the bylaw itself will become operative.
And that's the date from when all the changes, or whatever changes are made to the exercise rules, would come into effect on that date. Okay, so go on then, Brad. You can go to the next question. What is the iwi's whakaaro? If I pronounce that right.
So I'm not sure if this is in specific relation to Te Kotu again. So in terms of when we did that, sorry, I'm having a mind blank, concept design, they were our partners through both of those at both Te Miru War Memorial Park and also Te Kotu. So they did have a voice through that, and I'm sure that the team will be linking in with mana whenua through Ngāwi Tōpū or Waipa, or other more specific measures through this process as well. Don't know if Carl, if you've got any more to add to that.
No, that's exactly right. This is early stages, getting feedback. Once we've got formal submissions, they're generally, public to everybody once we get to the hearing stage, so everyone will be able to see what views are being put forward.
Okay, thanks. I'll see there's another. See if there's another question. No other questions so far. Okay, I'm going to ask a question around what are the possibilities of replacing exercise areas with alternatives. So if, say, you take a site away from being an exercise area to, say, an on-leash area, have we got any other sites lined up to replace them for exercise? What's the general feeling from your discussions?
So Brad's team and my team have had a recent meeting looking at that exact issue based on the feedback that's come in, and yeah, we're currently mapping out some good potential options to put forward to council in terms of where further areas could be developed or areas that are more suitable could be located. So yes, that's already underway.
and any possibility of sort of, should we say, linear walks rather than fields?
They're quite challenging sites to find in Waipa. We've got a few down on the Waikato River in Cambridge. We've got sort of some on-lead areas in Te Amiru with the Pioneer Walkway and things like that. But yeah, any ideas that people have, we're keen to hear them, and we'll definitely have put them into our consideration.
Okay, and I suppose the other question then around KAKEPUKU, which is bushwalk, and other, do we have any alternatives in terms of bushwalks that you can think of?
Again, we're in pretty limited space of that in our current state as well. Down by Lola Silcock and Settlers Track are two areas that currently have a little bit of bush cover on the river there. But there's no extended bush that we actually own that provides that that level of amenity.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, not sure if you want to read this out. Well, okay, I'm game for it. So what a waste of time this is. So let's be honest, whatever you decide, you can't enforce one way or another. Okay. The writer considers this to be naivety on an epic scale. Great to hold a webinar, but basing your decisions on feedback of less than 100 people is just ridiculous. Actually 300, but they're comments of various kinds, admittedly. And 104 people for Lake Tekautu. Many dog walkers simply don't care. They're happy to exercise their dogs off leash, even in well-signed leash only areas. Get aggressive when challenged, and council do nothing to help. This discussion is all just for show to make it look like you've consulted with the taxpayer. Enforcement is the elephant in the room. You can have all the signage, rules and bylaws you like, but if you don't enforce, which you don't and won't, then it's a waste of time, just like the pink circles Norwich Post still cluttering the roads around Cambridge. Okay. Carl, that sounds very much like one for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to say the council's not doing enforcement is plainly incorrect. We impound dogs, we're issuing infringement notices, we have interactions with numerous dog owners on numerous occasions and enforcing the rules that are there. But there are also a lot of other components to that, you know, education and other options as well. We can only act on what we're aware of. So to make general comments about the level of enforcement is fine, but we'll generally need specifics in order to act on those sort of things. And I think the other point to clarify there is we're not making decisions at this stage. This is early feedback to guide our process on what recommendations will later be made to council, where the decisions will be made. So who knows how many hundreds of submissions we might receive through the formal submission process. But certainly if there are specific issues with specific areas or dog owners or something, then we need to know about it, because we will follow those up.
And I think it's also probably worth pointing out that this review project is something that we're required to do by law at least every 10 years. We've just brought this forward because there were a number of more pressing issues that we needed to consider. So the fact we have a dog control policy and a dog control bylaw is something that we are required to have. So we need to work through this process. Now here's a question that I suspect, Carl, with your experience of Waipa, you might be able to help with the answer to this. Do you know when dogs were first allowed on KAKEPUKU? The writer understands that until 5 to 10 years ago they were prohibited.
I know there has been some confusion around when changes have taken place. Certainly since the 2015 policy was implemented, it has been dog on lead, but there were certainly parties that thought a prohibition still existed. And it wasn't until we changed signage that difference in understanding became apparent. Prior to 2015, I still believe that council's portion of the reserve was dog off lead and docks was dog prohibited, but I'd need to go back and have a look at the policy that existed prior to 2015 to be sure.
Okay. There's a comment which is probably more for you, Brad, that Te Awamutu's War Memorial Park is as sacred as any cemetery. That might be something that you've heard during the concept plan development.
Yeah, so especially on the northern side of the Mangahoi, at the confluence of the Mangahoi and Mangapiku streams, there's Kaipaka, so it does hold significance for mana whenua. And obviously through the history of Memorial Park to the south side of the Mangahoi stream, it's obviously got plenty of attachment there as well for many of our community in Te Awamutu as memorial to fallen soldiers and things like that over time. So it is a special place that we've got in our district for looking back at pre-European times, but also the more recent memorial features that are there.
Okay, thank you. And a questioner who has recently joined the meeting. If you missed the presentation, then it is recorded, so we'll be posting it on the council website, so you'll be able to go back and review it all. The question is, has the council got any forward plans for fencing to be completed on some of the off-lead dog parks in Cambridge, for example, McKinnon Park?
The first step in that is confirming where those areas are going to be. Sorry, Brad, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we've got no confirmed plans at this point of at McKinnon Park specifically, but your answer was going to be much more in depth and informative, so you carry on.
The first step is where you need to go through the process of confirming where those off-lead areas are going to be, and then sort of plan from there. So there are some existing areas, obviously, that may cease to be off-leash, and there may be areas that are not currently off-leash that will become so. That will be the best time to then go the next stage and see whether any of those lend themselves to being fenced and what the advantages and disadvantages are of fencing those particular areas. So again, that's been part of discussions we've already had in terms of some existing areas that we are relatively sure we would like to retain, and whether they lend themselves to be fenced or not. Like I think I mentioned last time, there are pros and cons to fencing off-leash areas, so we'd need to work through and make sure it's the best option for that particular place.
And then you're going to have to think around how much that's going to cost and how that fits into your budgets and which years that can be done and so on and so forth, I presume.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, that's standard.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I haven't yet got another question, but I see Chloe's typing, so something could be coming through. No further questions so far, so I'll just give that a little bit more time before closing out on this, because you might yet think of another question or so to put to us. We were very aware that dogs are part of people's families, and it's a very emotive issue that we're dealing with here. So we've been trying to get as much feedback as we can and ideas and concerns that you have, so that we can try and please as many people and as many dogs as possible. But we do realize, as was demonstrated by some of the slides, and particularly the feedback on Lake Tekuutu, for example, that we're just not going to be able to please everybody, much as we would like to. So unless, of course, Carl and Brad and their teams can work some wonderful magic and find ways of actually pleasing all the people all of the time. But we know what it's like. Hello. We've got another. Is it a question? What's the name of the doggy in the background? I don't know. Let's throw that across to the animal control team. Carl, do you know the name of the doggy in the background?
The dog in the background, I believe, was owned by a staff member in our Cambridge office who helped us with publicity when the Wordsworth dog agility equipment was established. But the short answer is no, I can't.
And I've got someone who said Helen. Now I don't know whether it's Helen's dog or the dog's name was Helen or what. So
or Helen in animal control would most likely know the answer.
Yeah. So anyway, so I've had another comment come in. Thank you. The off-lead use green belt polo field in Cambridge was ungated and had some issues with breaks in fencing. The person who's commented fundraised to completed this with the approval of Council Parks and Reserves representative. Total cost $1,800. The Lions donated $600, and there was a give a little page that raised the majority of the balance. This sounds really good to me. The cost of fence is not as high as people seem to want to indicate, and now this field is used by so many people. The fact they're coming from Hamilton, as they like the safety so much. Okay, well, thank you and well done to whoever has who was involved in that fundraising and getting that fencing. I think the point is, Carl, that your budget argument or your budget can stretch quite a way.
Well, we always try our best, and
yeah,
it's just a matter of weighing up what the favoured outcome is. If it's a simple adding gates to existing fencing or fencing a small access point to an existing reserve or something, then easy wins. But if we're talking about fencing large open areas, then obviously a different question.
Okay, I can see a question that has come in. If the policy is changed to stop dogs on a site, such as KAKEPUKU, what steps will council take to reinforce the policy on people who breach it?
Any dog that's off lead in an area where that's not permitted, there's a number of options there. I mean, obviously we tend to follow a graduated model. We would speak to the owner, give them a warning and an education first, and then if that doesn't resolve the issue, then we're into infringement fines, etc. And in certain cases, if a person gets more than a certain number of infringement notices within a certain period of time, we can get into areas of court orders and disqualifying people from owning dogs and a whole range of different options. So we start at the lowest and work our way through, just as we do with any offence.
Okay. Is there anything anyone wants to add? See that we're at 10 to 7. You're probably hungry as well. Okay. Can't see anything else coming up. So we'll, I think, probably call it a day there. As our friend says, thanks for coming. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for all your feedback over the winter as well. We've got plenty of work to do. And we'll work up some proposals, talk with our elected members, and we'll come back to you and the whole community, hopefully April, May next year. Okay, thank you very much and good evening.